Okay, some considerations of ideological conservatism on pages 13, 14, and 15 of the notes handout, starting on page 13. Unlike ideological liberalism and socialism, where we had to introduce a bunch of the outlooks of those ideologies and their belief systems, we really don't have to do that for conservatism because we've been studying conservatism. Conservatism simply calls for traditional Western civilization, particularly traditional Western civilization as ruled by and dominated by the hereditary upper class. Conservatism is the ideology of the hereditary elite, the upper class, the warrior elite that we've been talking about. The only reason it becomes known as conservatism now, as opposed to traditional Western civilization, as we've referred to it previously, is now there are ideological opponents, if you will, in existence, such as liberalism, socialism, Marxism, etc. So traditional Western civilization becomes known as conservatism. Conservatism is the ideology of the hereditary elite. And what the conservatives want to do is they want to reimpose traditional society in the wake of the French Revolution that had introduced all these modern ideas. As I said to you when we introduced liberalism earlier, make sure you do not equate ideological conservatism with the contemporary American Republican political party. Those are just simply not the same thing. Similarly, with liberalism, you would not equate that to the American Democratic political party. Conservatism and liberalism are Western ideologies about how to organize and structure human societies. When you look at page 13, the background of ideological conservatism has to do with the introduction of aspects of modern human society during the French Revolution, particularly the Napoleonic phase of the French Revolution. Under Napoleon's leadership, France took over the bulk of the European continent here. And if you'll recall, everywhere Napoleon went and took over, they had taken out the hereditary elite, the lords and the kings throughout Europe, and they had introduced the Napoleonic Code. And the Napoleonic Code was all about meritocracy, careers open to talent, equality, equality before the law, equality of taxation, etc., etc. All these modern notions. What the conservatives want to do is they want to roll all this back. Now they've defeated Napoleon. They meet at an event called the Congress of Vienna, which is stated at the top of page 13 here in 1815. Upon defeating Napoleon, the monarchs and the lords, the hereditary elite around Europe, they have a meeting in Vienna, which is the capital city of the Habsburg royal family, the longest running royal family in Western civilization, elite royal family in Western civilization. And under the leadership of the chief minister, advisor of the Habsburg family, Metternich, the hereditary elite come up with a plan, essentially, to reimpose traditional society. Instead of a modernized, reformed human society as introduced during the Napoleonic phase around Europe, they want to reimpose hereditary hierarchy. They want to reimpose hereditary rule. At the Congress of Vienna, this meeting hosted by the Habsburg family, led by their chief advisor, Clemens von Metternich, the hereditary elite, the conservatives talk a lot about legitimacy. And what the conservative elites are saying is they are the rightful rulers of Western civilization. And they have kind of their notion of legitimacy is predicated on two ideas, beliefs. One, they believe in the divine right of kings. They believe God ordains human society to be organized as such and structured as such based on a traditional hereditary basis. But additionally, they also point to events and circumstances in early modern times, such as particularly, this is right in the wake of the French Revolution, that traditional conservative Western civilization is the only basis of stability in the civilizational tradition. So what they point to is like politically, if you use one of these diagrams of spectrums, I should say, of liberty and authority. Obedience to traditional authority, they see as the basis of order and stability and functionality for Western civilization. Their exhibit A is the French Revolution. When you move away from that, this is going to lead to all sorts of different anarchies and chaos. So exhibit A for the conservatives would be the French Revolution, like people start parading each other, tearing each other apart, and parading each other and decapitating people and parading their heads around in the public square. The government starts to systematically mass murder its own population and cutting their heads off in the radical phase of the revolution. Also in the radical phase of the revolution, the government tries to illegalize, essentially stamp out Christianity out of the society altogether. During the Napoleonic phase, it unleashes French domination across the continent, which claims millions of lives in the Napoleonic Wars. What the conservatives are essentially arguing is obedience to traditional authority is the basis of stability. And the French Revolution they see as an example of having moved away from traditional authority, and things immediately become totally unstable and totally chaotic and totally violent and dysfunctional. So what conservatism ideologically is going to say in terms of challenges to modern times and challenges to modern beliefs is what's most interesting about conservatism. Their argument is moving away from tradition does not lead to progress. The conservative argument is moving away from tradition leads to chaos. It leads to anarchy. They see the French Revolution as a free-for-all and anarchy. Maybe even more interestingly is they play this intellectually as well, in terms of their critique of modern times and their critique of modern beliefs. The conservatives argue that moving away from traditional authority as an arbiter of truth and moving towards greater individualism leads to, now in this case, we're not talking about a political anarchy, but we're talking about an intellectual anarchy. Everybody thinking for themselves leads to more and more and more differing opinions and competing truth claims, the degree to which you enter into an intellectual chaos. The way conservatism views modern times is an intellectual free-for-all, an intellectual anarchy. Maybe or maybe not you've seen this political cartoon on the back wall of my classroom. You've got a female and male compatriots here. They're both on multiple computing devices at once, not making eye contact with one another. And the woman says to the man, "How do you know if a news story is true?" And the man replies, "If I agree with it." And this is what the traditional conservative would say, this is the inevitable outcome of modern times. Modern times is an intellectual anarchy. Individualism, you're never going to get certainty out of individualism. Individualism is going to lead to a multiplicity of different opinions. It's going to lead to a multiplicity of different competing truth claims. Doubt, the starting place of modern thought and intellectual authority, for the conservative, doubt doesn't lead to certainty. Thinking for yourself doesn't lead to certainty. It leads to mass confusion. So for the conservative, modern times is fundamentally unstable. It's an anarchy, it's a free-for-all, politically, intellectually, etc. Now, let's turn our attention to page 14. And on page 14, you've got some of the plan that Metternich and his allies amongst the hereditary elite come up with, and I'm going to let you read that on your own. And as it says here at the very bottom of these paragraphs on the 14th, thus the members of the Congress Vienna, the hereditary elite, oppose major currents of change in Western civilization. And on the 14th and on to the 15th, it says they're against liberalism. I'm going to leave that one up to you. I think you can discern how conservatism is in opposition to liberalism, and you could come up with any number of talking points about that. Conservatism is also going to be against nationalism, And on page 15, we'll talk briefly about how conservatism is against there are some instances in which conservatives were even against industrialization. Let's look at the nationalism piece here for a second. Here's the Austrian Habsburg Empire in Central and Eastern Europe. And you can see all these peoples here that were contained within the Austrian Empire. Now, what would it mean for the Habsburg royal family if nationalistic belief took hold in their empire? Each one of these different peoples would want independence from this empire. What nationalism as a modern source of identity represents to traditionalism is it threatens to tear these dynastic empires apart. It's going to lead to desires for independence. And if you look at this part of Europe today, which used to be the Habsburg Empire, today we have a Croatia, we have a Czech Republic, we have an Italy, we have a Poland, we have a Serbia, we have a Slovakia, Germany, Hungary, Romania, Slovenia, and Ukraine. These are all independent countries. Nationalism's going to be the winner, okay? But you can see how the traditionalists, why they would be against nationalism, because it would mean the dissolution, the breaking apart of their dynastic empires. That's obviously something they want to prevent. Instead, what they want is loyalty to the monarch. They don't want national identity where people are citizens of the nation. They want people to be subjects of the monarchy. So this conservatism has to do with where identity is going to lie going forward. Traditionally, it's been in obedience and loyalty to the monarch. Nationalism is going to challenge that. So conservatism is going to be fundamentally against nationalism. And then on page 15, let's just briefly talk about a couple instances in which traditional conservative monarchies intentionally stunted the industrial development of their own societies and why. You can see, and this is just an indicator of the density of railroad lines, and the more railroads you have, that means kind of is an indicator of how much you've industrialized. As you go west to east, you can see these railroad lines and the levels of industrialization start to peter out, especially in Russia and Austria, the Romanov and the Habsburg monarchies, respectively. The Habsburgs in Austria and the Romanov in Russia, they intentionally stunted the industrial development of their own societies. They limited the number of factories. They limited the number of railroads that were able to be built within their kingdoms. Now, why would that be the case? Well, both of these societies still had serfdom. Their entire political regime was based around serfdom. If you'll remember way back to the establishment of these absolute monarchies, the exchange between the lords and the monarchs, where the lords gave up their sovereignty to the monarchs in order to form these absolute monarchies in exchange for greater control over the serfs. If you allow industrialization to occur, that means the concentration of the underclass in the urban centers, in the cities. You cannot maintain serfdom in an industrial context. You're not going to have a preponderance of the underclass concentrated and packed into the cities and not pay them. That's just going to be impossible politically and socially. So the Russians, the Romanov royal family, and the Habsburg, the Austrian royal family, they intentionally stunt the industrial development of their own societies. And what we'll see is, over time, Russia and the Austrian Empire over here, they're going to fall more and more behind economically and militarily as a result.